Chapter 28, Cabinet of Wonders, the Most Beautiful Thing. At dawn, Yosef stepped outside the sign of the compass. He blinked. Slouched over a horse was a sleeping girl. Her dress was water-stained and dirty. Her face was hidden against the horse's mane. But it was her hair, shorter than he remembered, less snarled than he had thought, that convinced him who the girl was, for her hair was the same color as his wife's. He had barely dared to hope when he first saw the girl, but now he was sure it was Petra. He picked her up as if she weighed no more than air. She mumbled. He strode into the house, calling, "Dita! Mikhail!" But it was David who ran down first. "What is it? What is it?" he cried excitedly. Then he saw what his father carried. "Petra!" "Get your mother," Yosef ordered. "I'm always being told to fetch people," David complained. Yosef frowned. David turned and ran up the stairs. By now, Petra had woken up, though she felt groggy. Her throat was on fire, and it was hard for her to swallow. "Astro?" she thought confusedly. "Am I really home?" "Yes, but I think you are ill." "Yosef?" she croaked. He smiled at her. He carried her up the stairs and into the bedroom, where he sat her on the bed. He told her to lie down, but she refused. "I'm all right," she insisted. Dita entered the room and paused in the doorway, staring at Petra unbelievingly. Petra braced herself, for she knew Dita's fury would be fierce. She waited for her cousin's silence to break. She waited for Dita to berate her. But to her surprise, Dita did no such thing. She just walked across the room, pressed Petra's hair back from her face, gazed at her, and then held her tight. "We thought you were dead," she said. Her voice shook. "Is it true?" Mikhail Kronos stood in the doorway. David was leading him by the hand. "She's not really here? Safe?" "I am, father," said Petra, "and I've brought back your eyes." "You what?" He let go of David and felt along the wall for a chair and sink into one. Astrophil darted across the room and climbed onto his knee. Dita, Yosef, and David stared at Petra. "You did not," David scoffed. "I did." Forgetting her sickness, she launched with excited energy into the entire story, from the moment Neil tried to steal her purse to her dream last night. Yosef listened, his face impassive. Petra couldn't see Dita's reaction, for the woman stayed beside Petra, sitting on the edge of the bed, with her arm around her. David was riveted. He looked tense during the moments that had scared Petra, laughed at the funny parts, and wrinkled his brow when she explained a dilemma that she had to solve. But when Petra finished speaking, and a silence stole over the room, David just said, "That's a great story, Petra, but I don't believe any of it." "Maybe you'll believe this." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her father's eyes. They rested on her palm. "Those are the ones Master Stakhan made," David said. "That's what you think. Father will know the difference." She marched to where Mikhail Kronos sat and put the eyes in his hands. Petra stood before him, waiting for him to speak. He just sat there, holding his eyes with one hand and his bandaged head with the other. He closed his hand into a fist, opened his mouth, and then shut it into a thin line. "What have you done?" "What? What do you mean? I've brought you your eyes." "You've brought danger on this house." He flung the silver eyes across the room and they rolled on the floor. "But you've told Iris December who you are. That man recognized you." "But they won't tell. I trust Iris and they helped me. They can't tell anyone about me without getting themselves in trouble too." He gave a hollow laugh. "It's when they are in trouble that they will reveal every detail they can about you." Petra felt suddenly angry. For someone who was stupid enough to be tricked by the prince, to think he was so friendly and nice and smart, you seem to pretend. You seem to pretend to know an awful lot about what people really think and how they act and how they feel. "Petra," Yosef said warningly, "and for someone who's done the last thing in the world I would have ever wanted, you seem to pretend you know what's best for me." Mikhail Kronos shouted back. "How long do you think it will take before the prince realizes that a theft from the Cabinet of Wonders by 2 children has something to do with me? It'll take about 2 seconds, Petra. It'll take about 2 seconds for the prince to realize that the clock's heart is destroyed. Lots of people could have wanted to break that heart. I told you what John D said. If he knew about it, plenty of other people must have known about it too. The prince will think that one of his brothers found out about it and hired someone to destroy it. And my eyes? Do you think they won't notice that they're missing? Petra was at a loss for words. Well, so what? So what? A few months ago I was blind, but we were all safe. Now we are not. You think we would have been safe here? The prince couldn't figure out how to put the heart together, but he wouldn't have waited around forever. He would have sent for you. He would have made you do it. And that would have involved only me, Petra. Don't you see? I made my decisions. I've made my plans. I didn't ask you to be part of them. But I already was. I know you wanted to send me to the academy. Oh, yes, I know. Mikhail Kronos waved his hand. Well, that will never happen now. Good. I'm glad. Because I never would have gone. Her voice broke. She felt as if something were wringing her insides, as if she were a rag. What do you want from me? What do you want me to say? I did this for you. Did you really? He raised his hands and then let them fall to the arms of the chair. Petra stood before him. He shook his head again. This is the worst thing you could have done. This is not what Petra had imagined. This was not what she had imagined at all. And so she said something she could never have imagined she would ever say. I hate you, she whispered. And then she ran out of the room. She sped across the wet snow, which was already melting in the rising sun. She ran until she choked on her own breath. She pushed her way into the woods, sat in the cold mud, and cried. Unless you count several hours of chopping onions, Petra hadn't shed a tear since her father had been brought home to Oaknew, even though there were many times when she wanted badly to do so. Now Petra didn't think she would ever stop crying. When she did, she felt like a dried up riverbed, like packed, cracked dirt with no chance of ever being anything else. She stared blankly she stared blankly ahead and wondered if she should run away again, if she should try to find the Lavari. She fingered the horseshoe around her neck. Maybe it wasn't too late. But then something silvery crept across her foot. Go away, Astro, she said in a dull voice without looking down. I'm not Astro, Phil. I'm Roshina. It was a tin mouse with long tail and tiny paws. Petra saw Yosef pushing aside bare tree branches. He walked steadily toward her. She didn't move. He hunkered down beside her. Petra, you've done a brave thing. She didn't look at him. She rubbed at her tears. When your dad's less scared, he's going to realize that too. Scared? When Lucy and Pavel returned from Prague and said they'd left you there with some make-believe aunt, we were very worried. Prague isn't a place for a 12-year-old girl on her own. I'm 13, she said sullenly. 13, he nodded. Everyone rounded on Tomek. I don't think he's been out of his room all this time you've been gone. He kept claiming that the only thing he knew was that you wanted to go to Prague. Petra had known she could trust Tomik not to reveal her plan. So I went to the city to look for you, Yosef said. You did? Of course. Do you think we would have waited around until you came home? If you came home? What would you've done in our shoes? I asked the beggar children about you. I saw homeless, crippled, and mad children your own age. And I had to go home empty-handed, thinking the worst things. Don't you understand that when your dad's upset the way he is, it's because he's still seeing all the things that we thought must have happened to you. Even though you're here and alive and safe, he blames himself that you left in the first place. As Petra listened, she imagined how everything could have gone wrong. She had never let herself think about it before, because then she might not have had the courage to go through with her plan. But she understood now what it would have been like if she had been caught, thrown into prison, or worse. Not or worse, or hanged. She realized that this would have given her father misery on top of his blindness. She imagined what it would have been like if she had returned home as triumphant as she had felt only an hour ago and discovered that her father was dying from a sickness or from worry or from anything. Then everything she had done would have been for nothing. Let's go back, Yosef said and held out his hand. She took it. When she walked into the sign of the compass, she could hear Dita and her father arguing. They stopped when they heard the door creak. Her father turned around. He wore no bandages, and his face was whole and cured. His silver eyes gleamed. Petra. He walked toward her and put his hand on her cheek. He looked into her face. Now that, he started to say, he tried again, that is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.